inbound lead management because we had inbound leads coming in and obviously had to capitalize on that opportunity.
Welcome to Revenue Insights. Every week, we'll be joined by revenue leaders from some of the most successful and highest growing companies. Together, we explore how they built their revenue teams, the journeys that they've been on, and the lessons they have learned along the way. Revenue Insights is brought to you by Ebster. We're a revenue intelligence platform designed to help revenue teams to build more pipeline, close more deals, and retain more customers. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Revenue Insights podcast. Today, I'm joined by Robb Finkelstein, who's the head of revenue operations at Heyday. He's previously worked at Shipboard, Idea Financial, and On Deck. Robb, it's great to meet you.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah, really excited to dig into what you're doing at Heyday at the minute, and also some of your past experience as well. But for everyone listening at home that obviously who perhaps haven't heard of you before, what's your story?
Yeah, so I kind of fell backwards into revenue operations at the beginning of my career, graduated college, and got the opportunity to work for Dish Network, big Fortune 500 company at the time, who gave me an offer within their sales operations group, which I had never heard of and didn't know what it was, but it seemed like a great opportunity, a great way to start my career. And since then, it's kind of the rest is history. I've been in several sales and revenue operations roles, leading into revenue operations leadership roles. So I went from there into the fintech sector, where I worked in revenue operations at On Deck and Idea Financial, and then moved my way into the e-commerce world, which I'm really, really passionate about. So was head of RevOps at Shipboard, which is an end-to-end 3PL servicing small to medium-sized e-commerce businesses. And then now currently at Heyday, where we acquire and incubate leading digitally native consumer brands. And so my role at Heyday is really focused on the strategy and operations around, going out and acquiring top e-commerce brands.
Yeah, I'm really interested to dig into a bit more about what it is that you're doing at Heyday at the minute, because it sounds like a really interesting business model. What was it about the project there that really attracted you to it?
Yeah, for sure. It's just a very, very unique industry that, completely took off in 2020 and 2021. I think it was in 2021, there was 12 billion in venture capital that flowed into the space of companies, looking to acquire and roll up e-commerce businesses. I was just extremely intrigued by the notion that, you could build a company that had heightened expertise in all the different areas: operations, marketing, creative, brand management, analytics, and kind of outperform, the general retail e-commerce market by really building deep expertise. And so I found, just that business model to be extremely interesting. And then I feel, it's pretty rare in a RevOps scenario to be able to get in really early at a company. Typically, companies are hiring RevOps once they've, gotten some traction, built out a sales team. But Heyday knew that an outbound strategy, a strong outbound strategy for acquiring businesses would be a big differentiator and would be really important. So I was given the opportunity to join, very, very early, which has been in building everything from complete scratch, which has always kind of been a dream of mine in RevOps.
That's actually something that I was really keen to dig into beforehand. So at what stage was it? Series A when you joined? Was it Series A when you joined, or perhaps before?
Yeah, I joined right as they were announcing their Series A. Right. Well, they announced the Series A in November, and I joined the 1st of January. So yeah, right as they raised the Series A.
Amazing. And then when you went in, what did it look like? What was the state of play? Was it literally ground zero, literally nothing there, or?
Yeah, I mean, it was completely ground zero from a operations infrastructure standpoint. They had acquired a handful of brands, with that initiative led, pretty much by the CEO, the head of growth, and the founding team. And so those were all deals that had been brought in by, either brokers or bankers. So there wasn't actually any sales process in place that even led to those deals. It was through partnerships, and so there was literally nothing in place. Everything was being tracked in Well, actually, that's not true. Contacts were being tracked in HubSpot. Everything else, deal progress, this and that was being tracked in Google Sheets. And basically, we were starting our first two, business development reps 2 weeks after I started. They had just, released a bunch of PR and had some basic forms on the website. So it was, hey, in 2 weeks, we're going to have a sales team starting. We need a CRM up. We need the inbound leads flowing into Salesforce. We need a cadence for them to respond to inbound leads. We need you to start working on outbound. We need you to build the total addressable market, implement the basic tech stack. And so, it was completely blank slate, but, I was given the liberty to kind of lead the strategy on that and build things, how I thought was the right way. So it was a great scenario to walk into.
I think you touched on it a little bit there, but where were the key areas that you were trying to build out, perhaps in, the first 6 months, and what were you prioritizing first?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first things first, the first thing we had to prioritize was inbound lead management, because we had inbound leads coming in and obviously, had to capitalize on that opportunity. So, the very first thing was, okay, we need to get the website, we need to get a formal CRM implemented. And we quickly determined that Salesforce was what we wanted to use for that. So obviously get the inbound leads automatically integrating with the CRM, get some basic lead routing going. And then, quickly brought in a sales engagement platform to facilitate, and to an extent automate, responding to inbound leads. So that was the first priority, just because the lead flow was there and we had to capitalize on that. And then, obviously there's a lot that goes into implementing the CRM, which I did do on my own. So quite honestly, I always like to start with what's every data point that we're going to want to capture, and which of those can be automated. So just spending a lot of time being thoughtful about what data we're going to want to collect, and how we can automate that collection, because there's certain data you can go back and get and enrich. There's some data that if you don't have the process set up to collect in the beginning, you just don't have it. So that was a really important piece. And then from there, determining the outbound strategy, both from measuring total addressable market, and then carving out pieces of that, prioritizing and carving out pieces of that market. What are the best data sources to, actually target what those companies are and the contacts that are there. So the very first, so obviously piece number one, figuring out what companies we're going to reach out to, figuring out who the personas are, and then starting to build outbound cadences. How do we think these people want to be engaged with? What should the messaging look like? What should the steps look like? What are the rules of engagement? And so that was really, the first 6 months, the inbound engine, building that outbound engine and getting a strong grasp on, data and process for penetrating the market.
Amazing. And obviously before, I know you were working at ShipBob. So I'm curious to know, going into Heyday and being able to build it from the ground up as you have done, were there some learnings that you took from your time there that you then have kind of implemented?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, ShipBob. Yeah, so ShipBob was another great opportunity. They were further along. I came in when they were Series C, and they already had 40 BDRs and 20 some account executives, and they had processes stand up, although it needed a lot of work. And so, when I first stepped in at ShipBob, one of the questions I asked was, well, what are the daily activity expectations? And it was well, it's technically this, but activity doesn't track reliably. Like the sales engagement platform isn't reliable and reps aren't tracking X and Y, so we don't really manage to it. And so that was really eye-opening. And so taking that learning over and kind of building a culture of accountability, we're hey, the CRM is the source of truth. And I know sales reps hate hearing this, but if it's not in Salesforce, it didn't happen. Really getting buy-in from on that vision from every level of management, and from the sales reps especially, and then saying, okay, these are our systems. This is how things should work. If something isn't tracking correctly, that's on you for you to flag and for me to fix. But we're not going to have excuses around not understanding our activity, and that ended up being really, really strong because to this point now we have a really, really good grasp on the data of everything we're doing, every interaction, contacts, activities, unique details about the business. And so I think that was one of the biggest things, having that culture of accountability and tracking and adherence to CRM process was big.
So what's the secret then? How did you actually manage to get the buy-in?
the secret is getting senior leadership bought in, being like, literally like, this is my, as RevOps, like, this is my number one thing I'm telling you. You hired me to do a job, and this is, what I'm telling you is important. And almost, if you want this to be successful, you need to specifically communicate the importance of this. And luckily, we had a leadership team that totally understands that. And so that's again, the thing, like having all levels on the same page is critical.
I suppose that's one of the big benefits really of being able to build this out from the very beginning, is going into it knowing data and having all of the right data points in the first place is going to be critical to literally everything else that you do. So a huge, I guess, piece of advice for everyone listening there. I appreciate it's very difficult, after a while, once you've got a more mature sales process and you've got it built out a lot more, it's so much harder to go back and then build it in. So actually building it out from the very beginning is so crucial. So Rob, something I'm interested to know, obviously you kind of touched on it at the beginning, but I'm interested to know more about what the sales process is like at Heyday and how it compares to where you've been at before.
Yeah. Well, it's one thing is that it's really evolved over time. So I'd say one way it's differed is just the extent to which it's changed over time. We entered the market thinking, perhaps that the ideal acquisition profile of a company was X. And so, we built out the playbook to target and attract, a certain, and I have to be like intentionally a little bit vague, but built out the playbook to attract and target, a certain type of company. And then as this, again, like this space was very new, the company started during the pandemic. So obviously the pandemic had certain impacts on e-commerce trends. And then those trends actually over time have kind of not gone the way people thought. People thought the pandemic would bring e-commerce trends 10 years into the future. They've actually now kind of settled back into their normal levels that they would have been without the pandemic. And so anyway, the type of business that we've, targeted over time has changed. And therefore our cadence and messaging, has had to constantly evolve. And so at first it might have been really focused on the top brands that sold exclusively on Amazon, now shifting more to acquiring true, omni-channel, digitally native brands, being more the play. And now thinking, brands, before we might have been hesitant to brands that had retail presence, but now or heavy wholesale, but now that's something that we're interested in. And so every time you do that, right, you kind of have to go back to the drawing board on what you're trying to do and how you approach those targets and how you go after the people is kind of evolves based on the types of businesses you're engaging.
So what would you say is the biggest challenge as a result of that?
The biggest challenge is, for us specifically, and this may not apply, is, we're not selling software to someone, we're buying a business. And we want to buy, the most healthy, profitable, growing, differentiated big businesses on the market. So one of the biggest challenges is being able to accurately map the data, that the third-party data that's available on the market to the businesses. Like e-commerce revenue estimates are only so good. No one on earth has perfect e-commerce revenue estimates. Understanding growth can only be so good. Understanding profitability from a third-party data standpoint is basically impossible. And then there's those soft, so those are hard elements, but then there's those soft elements like, is this a differentiated brand, right? There's 10,000 skincare brands selling direct to consumer online. How do you determine which are the ones that are actually doing something different? Okay, well, you might be able to download a data set that has includes ingredients of the product, so you can start to target more deeply that way. And so that's been the biggest challenge, is being able to accurately target the best businesses, and then when you find them, really being able to drill down into the ones that are we think the best fit for what we're looking for.
It's a really curious kind of process, right? Because as you say, you're not selling to a customer per se. You're almost trying to attract people that you're going to actually go and invest in then. So does that present like unique challenges for your reps and your SDRs as well?
Yeah, it's unique challenges and unique opportunities. I mean, I think one of the major challenges is that when you're selling a product or service, obviously, I feel the right way to do business development, and I think most people in the sales development community would agree, is understanding their pain points, getting a discussion going, and then mapping your solution to their pain points. And, when you're trying to acquire in a business, you can still take that route to some extent. For example, your supply chain inflation is rising and, your supply chain costs are going up. And obviously, like, now might be the time to sell the business and move that burden on to someone else. Or what is your pain point? Advertising costs are rising. But at the end of the day, you can only get so sophisticated with mapping your solution to their problem when your solution is, well, let us buy the business from you. So really, if there's 60, 70 other firms doing the same thing, and at an eyes level, the solution is the same. It's a purchase. But then obviously the details of how you go about making that acquisition and what capabilities you can add to the business, that's what you really have to prove. That's the major challenge, is differentiating and showing that we truly are, the most value-added partner in the space, and the best buyer for their business.
So, and you touched on it at the beginning as well. So what's the opportunity then that comes with that model?
The opportunity is for them to be able to, either move on to their next venture or retire and see their business taken to a level that they maybe never even thought possible in the first place under their own ownership. Also, a lot of people start these companies start these as a product out of passion, and then it becomes, a real company. It gains traction. And believe it or not, a lot of people don't want to go build a big company. Like, that's not something they're actually interested in. So we give them the opportunity to see, their company still thrive, go to the next level, service their customers in the way that they built the business to do so, but they don't have to be the ones driving that. And then of course they get, a very nice 7 to 8 figure payout that they can then, lean back on.
So I'm guessing, well, you kind of touched on that. These are pretty huge deals that you're then working on. So it's kind of the onboarding process very similar to, where you've worked at previously in terms of, once you found a brand that you're going to purchase, is the handover then very similar to what you've worked with previously?
I'd say it's actually a good amount more sophisticated, integrating a product into someone's process versus integrating a company's entire business into yours. So we have a very, very long checklist with, every single team has their process throughout that integration process. So it's not like there's a customer onboarding team, right? There's our supply chain and operations team doing supply chain and ops onboarding. There's our marketing team doing marketing onboarding. There's our technology team integrating them into our technology stack. And there is a team responsible for owning that onboarding process from end to end, but the actual, functional part of it is obviously, complex and, well thought out, because there's a lot of nuance, obviously, to merging businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to take us in a slightly different direction. Something that we were talking about beforehand that you mentioned, being in a RevOps team of one, is something that I know will resonate a lot with our listeners. Not all blessed with being in a RevOps team of multiple people. So from your experience, particularly in Heyday at the minute, what would you say the advantages, but also the disadvantages are of being, the single revenue operations person?
Yeah, I would say the advantage is you really, if you can really stick to your prioritization and, set the tone on what you're working on based on what you think has the biggest impact. It's really high impact work. Everything you can justify that everything you're working on has to be very high impact, because, that's the only contribution that RevOps can make is that the one person is making. And so, there's actually not a lot of dealing with fire drills, because we're not going crazy and building out a 20, different tech. There's not 20 different, products in the tech stack. We don't have, 40 sales reps that, need to be every single one of their, performance deeply managed. And so I would say, taking it back a step, I'd say the main advantage is really being able to focus on a high impact work. Obviously, the disadvantage is, there's stuff that simply can't get done. And anyone in RevOps knows that, I think prioritization is by far the most important skill set for anyone in RevOps. And that, couldn't be more important than if you're a RevOps team of one. The skill of saying no is very important. The skill of, kind of having a strong opinion, managing up, and setting the tone for what your roadmap looks like is very important.
I completely agree. And so in terms of prioritization, I know what it can be like when you're getting requests left, right, and center, and all of a sudden it just piles up and piles up, particularly if you keep saying yes to things, right? So for you then, how do you prioritize? You mentioned about it being, based on impact, but is it literally from a perspective of, okay, if it's going to drive revenue, then great, we'll do it? Or are you looking at it in a slightly different way?
Yeah, well, similar but different. Heyday does a really good job of outlining our core company goals. So we do, year-long goal planning sprints, and there's, let's say, 5 flagship company goals, and then, some sub goals under that. So I'm always trying to strive towards achieving those goals. So that's the main thing. Revenue growth is always important to every company, but there's always going to be other initiatives that are important. So making sure the work is always driving towards those goals. And then I also kind of try to look at it on the matrix of like effort to impact. The highest impact work might be a ton of effort. There might also be relatively high impact work, not as high, but relatively high impact work that isn't actually as much effort. So how can you get the highest leverage for your effort in terms of impact is how I try to prioritize those things, higher as well.
If there's one piece of advice that you could give to other solo RevOpsers, I don't know if that's a word, RevOps professionals, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a good question. Just not being afraid to saying no, and having buy-in from your leadership on what your priorities are. So one-on-ones with whoever your boss is, or, weekly meetings, whoever your stakeholders is, making sure they're a part of the conversation of what your roadmap looks like, what you're focused on, and why. As long as everyone's bought in, if there's X, Y, and Z can't get done, but everyone understands it's because X and Y are getting done, and X and Y are most important, no one's ever going to have any problems. So really being transparent about your prioritization, why it is how it is very important.
Yeah, I love that. In addition to that, now you touched on earlier around when you came in, not the tech stack, well, obviously you didn't even have a CRM, right? Now you've had, I think, coming up to 2 years at Heyday. So what would you consider to be the essential tools then in your tech stack? You've had a complete free reign to build the blueprint. So what absolutely has to be in there?
Yeah, I think there's table stakes, like you literally, in my opinion, can't operate without these things. And then there's what I think are like the next, like very, very strong needs. And then there's maybe a third category that it's like, if these are right for your business, they're going to add a lot of value. So for me, the 3 absolute table stakes things that you must have are obviously is a CRM, but a CRM that's capable of automating processes and workflows and automating the capture of data. It's important to think about what are we going to need a couple of years from now. So a CRM that facilitates those needs, a sales engagement platform to support, both inbound and outbound, and then some type of customer data platform. So, some type of product or service that provides you data not only on the companies, but the people you're going after. Those are the 3 things that I think you need basically for any revenue engine. Then going down into, as the team starts to grow and things evolve and revenue's increasing, I do think like a conversation intelligence platform is very valuable. So something like a Gong or Chorus, to be able to record all your calls, understanding what's happening in those interactions. And then a lot of those tools now, they're building like pipeline management tools or forecasting accuracy tools. So I think that, obviously something like that can be really valuable. And then something to capture intent data. Intent data isn't a fit for every business. And so, for our business, honestly, like the companies that we're interested in acquiring and their activity online indicating that they're interested in an acquisition, there really isn't a lot of overlap there. We experimented with a couple of providers. It didn't work. But for a lot of companies, timing your cadence and your engagement with intent is obviously, a really high value activity. So I would say those are the essential platforms. But then, there's a million different tech pieces out there, and I went through the phase of thinking I had to look at everything, and I was leaving money on the table by not, using every tool on the market. But it's really important to think about like what are the top 3 things that you need help with? And is there technology out there that can help? Because I think oftentimes, we all get a ton of emails from people trying to sell us very helpful tools, and they're just, doing their job and they have a great product. But it's just simply not, you can find yourself trying to match a tool to a problem. But what you should be doing is taking a problem and finding a tool to help solve it. So if it's our sales reps aren't capturing enough data or taking great notes, what's a tool that can help facilitate that? We have a big rules of engagement duplicate management problem. Okay, it seems like you need a deduplication and lead routing system. So that's starting with the problem, not starting with the tool is my biggest piece of advice there.
I'm really interested to know then, obviously at Heyday, we've already touched on like how different the sales process is. So is there perhaps one tool then that you found that has really helped what you guys are doing that perhaps would fit in that bucket of, a more niche tool?
Yeah, this isn't really a niche tool, but I think just tools that allow you to get creative with your outreach. So I don't want to give, too much, I'll be a little bit intentionally vague here, but if you can get a competitive edge by doing better research on your companies you're going after and their competition, that could be one. Sending videos over email, sending LinkedIn voice messages, attending industry events. Like these aren't necessarily, I guess, attending an industry event isn't necessarily tools, but being every place you possibly can where your prospects are and your competition isn't. There's tools that can help you do that. And we've leveraged some tools that have been able to help us do that effectively. And that's been very impactful.
Nice. Excellently handled. Last question, Rob. And I'm really curious to know, is there one book that you would recommend to other revenue leaders? And that might be fiction, it might be non-fiction. And yeah, really interested to know if there's one that springs to mind.
Yeah, I could definitely do a better job of the business reading stuff. I'll be honest about that one. I haven't read.
We've had a real variety, so go with whatever first springs to mind.
Yeah, I haven't read a ton of books in the space. I mean, I think it also depends on what your goals are. One thing that I was new when I was at ShipBob, I was pretty new to the world of outbound, and we were doing really heavy outbound there. Outreach's like sales engagement book, they kind of. I think it's just called Sales Engagement, was really valuable and eye-opening to me because, there's a lot of good tools in that space, but Outreach did help pioneer that space. They helped pioneer modern sales engagement. There's a lot of gold in there in terms of how they specifically do it and have built the company they built. And that was really, really insightful one for me.
Awesome. We'll be sure to leave a link in the show notes so everyone can go and have a listen. Rob, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It's been great to have you on. For everyone that's listening and wants to learn a little bit more about you and perhaps connect on LinkedIn, I've kind of given it away, but where would they find you?
Yeah, we can find Heyday at heyday.co. If you're someone has, a great e-commerce business that would, is interested in potentially getting a huge exit, hit us up.
Fancy retiring sometime soon.
Yeah, that's right. And you can find me on LinkedIn, but that's about it.
Awesome. We'll put a link to your page down in the show notes as well as to Heyday. Because I mean, that's the way that your side hustle needs to go, right? Get a great direct-to-consumer brand going and then drink cocktails. That sounds like a wonderful way to go about it.
We've helped a lot of people do it. Yes, sir.
Rob, it's been amazing to have you on. Thank you so much again for giving me 30 minutes of your time. And thank you to everyone who's listened as well. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks, Lee. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Revenue Insights. If you want to learn more, subscribe to our newsletter and we'll deliver every episode straight to your inbox. If you have any questions, feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. Our links will be in the episode notes. See you next week.